Introduction to Video Remote Interpreting, or VRI, for consumers who are deaf. The Minnesota Department of Human Services Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division. Welcome. This course introduces consumers who are deaf to video remote interpreting and how you can use technology to bring a qualified interpreter in another location to facilitate your in-person communications with a hearing person. Your right to communication access. Effective personal communications is one of the most common challenges that people who are deaf and hard of hearing encounter. Your right to communication access is protected by several federal laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The right to communication access is also protected by the Minnesota Human Rights Act and other state laws. These laws require that all local, state, and federal government entities, organizations, healthcare providers, public schools, and most private businesses provide access to effective communications so that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from a service, a program, an entity, including people who are deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing. Communication access is considered a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. The term effective communications is important. This means that the law recognizes that every person's hearing loss is different, and what is effective for one person may not be effective for another. It also means that an entity or an organization can't make a blanket decision about how it will communicate with a person who is deaf or hard of hearing. Organizations need to be flexible, and they need to work with you to find a communication option that works for both parties. This does not mean they have to bring an interpreter in person for every interaction. If another communication option is just as effective or more effective in the situation, that option may be the reasonable accommodation. In most cases, the public or private entity you need to communicate with is responsible for arranging for and paying for services required to communicate effectively with you and other consumers who are deaf. However, you are responsible for the cost if the purpose of the communication is religious or personal. Your responsibilities as a consumer who is deaf. As a consumer who is deaf, you are responsible for notifying the entity in advance that you will need communication assistance. This gives the organization time to make arrangements. Be specific. After all, you know what's best for you. It's okay to suggest resources. An entity may not have a relationship with a service provider. and you'll be more comfortable working with someone you know and who knows you. During any interaction, it's your job to let the entity and the service provider know if a solution isn't effective for you, and then work with them to improve communications. Consumers who are deaf often have to advocate for their right to effective communications. This can be uncomfortable. But self-advocacy is most effective when you know what works best for you, you're prepared to offer solutions and resources, and you're flexible and willing to work with the organization to come up with a solution. You have the right to effective communications access. You can learn more about your communication options. Check the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services website at mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. Common communication solutions. Some people think that an on-site interpreter is their only choice. However, an on-site interpreter isn't always necessary, available, or even the best option. The best communication solutions will depend on: how do you communicate best? If you have a significant visual impairment, when you need to communicate, the purpose and the setting of the communication, if the interpreter needs to move around in order to adequately interpret for you, your access to common technology, and your access to a stable, high-speed internet connection. Depending on the situation, you might consider arranging for communication access, real-time translation, or CART. And thanks to widespread access to the internet and improved video technology, video relay services, telephone services, and video remote interpreting are now widely available. Video relay services. Video relay services is often referred to as VRS. It is a free, on-demand video interpreting service that allows a consumer who is deaf to use a telephone to communicate in ASL with a hearing person in a different location. It's available 24 hours a day, anywhere in the United States, and immediate access is guaranteed. Video remote interpreting. Video remote interpreting, or VRI, allows a consumer who is deaf to use video technology to connect visually to a qualified interpreter in a remote location, who facilitates communication with a hearing person in the same location. In some cases, all three parties might be in separate locations. To use VRI, you must have three things. First, you need a stable, high-speed internet connection. You can quickly check the strength of your connection by going to speedtest.net and following the instructions. This test will provide you with your download and upload speeds for operating VRI. For a group call, your upload speed should be a minimum of 600 kilobytes per second, and download speed should be a minimum of 1 megabyte per second. Second, you need a video camera connected to a mobile device, laptop, or a computer connected to a monitor or screen. And third, you need to connect with a VRI referral agency to schedule a qualified interpreter. Unlike VRS, a remote interpreter must be arranged in advance, just as you would as if you were hiring an on-site interpreter. Also, VRI is not free. In most cases, the business entity or the organization that requests the service pays for the service through a direct billing arrangement with the interpreter referral service. VRI can be used in most situations where you would schedule a qualified on-site interpreter. In fact, you may have used it during a medical appointment or in another healthcare setting, because many healthcare facilities routinely use VRI to communicate with patients who are deaf and family members. VRI can also be used to facilitate in-person communications during business meetings and presentations, at community events and activities, during in-home appointments, in educational settings, and legal situations. Let's learn how Regina is using VRI to grow her career. Going to work.
Hi, I'm Regina. I've used VRI many times, but it wasn't until I was asked to redesign the company's website that I realized how much I relied on it. This was a huge opportunity for me. I knew I had the technical know-how and the creativity, but I was worried about how I would get information from users. Written communications are okay, but sometimes you need to have a conversation to really understand what people like and don't like. With VRI, I can go to different offices to meet with someone or make a presentation and bring my computer and interpreter with me. Seamless. Fortunately, I had worked with Tanya in the past. She's a qualified interpreter at the VRI service our company uses. I started requesting Tanya whenever I needed an interpreter. I sent her materials in advance so she knew the topic we were going to discuss. She'd have a chance to ask me questions, and we agreed on signs for acronyms and key terms so we could communicate quickly during the meeting. It couldn't have been a better partnership. I bet you're wondering how the project went. Well, not to brag, but the new website won an award. How cool is that? Now I'm thinking about starting my own web design business. And I will definitely bring VRI.
VRI has many benefits. Because VRI interpreters join you remotely, your location doesn't matter, as long as you have adequate internet connection and the right technology. This means you don't have to adjust your schedule to accommodate available local interpreting resources. This is especially important if you live or work in a smaller community where local interpreters are scarce. It also gives you options if you prefer not to use a local interpreter for privacy or personal reasons. VRI also allows you to build a relationship with a specific interpreter and establish a schedule of routine appointments in advance. Most VRI referral services have access to qualified interpreters with different areas of expertise. Most also have access to interpreters who speak one or more languages. With access to a qualified interpreter, VRI is a good alternative for evening or overnight events, or when scheduling, a qualified on-site interpreter might be more challenging. And VRI may be less expensive than scheduling an on-site interpreter because there's no travel time or associated expenses involved. Let's learn how VRI helped create a more equitable workplace for Sean and other deaf employees. Working with my schedule.
Hey, I'm Sean. I have a great job assembling components for this medical device company. It's great pay. I work the overnight shift, which works really well for my family. I'm home in time to see my kids before they go to school, and I'm there in the evenings. Did I mention that it's some really good pay? There is one drawback, though. It's a pretty technical job, so there's always a lot of equipment training. Not to mention, we also have quarterly safety meetings. I mean, since I'm the only deaf employee on that particular shift, that means I have to arrange to attend a training session during the day where they have an interpreter scheduled, or I have to try and find an interpreter who's, willing to drive there at like midnight, and imagine it, being dark or snowy and there's like, a couple inches of snow. Getting through that, woof. Not many are willing to do that. Frankly, I just want to attend a training with my coworkers. That's it. Their questions are often my questions, and what I might have to say could benefit them as well. You know what I mean? I did tell my supervisor about a VRI option, and he completely listened and was totally on board. He called the referral agency that my friend had told me about, and we scheduled a remote interpreter. I used a laptop that had a camera, and man, it worked perfectly. We already have a VRI interpreter set up for the next 3 quarterly meetings, as well as we're going to use the same thing for my next performance review.
When VRI should not be used. While VRI is a good solution for many situations, it's not always the best choice. For example, an on-site interpreter is a better option if you'll be moving during the communication situation, such as if you're touring a facility. An on-site interpreter is better if you won't have direct access to the screen or the speaker is moving. VRI also shouldn't be used for meetings or social situations where multiple people are likely to be talking at the same time. This makes it difficult for the interpreter to follow who's speaking in these situations. VRI should also not be used if you have significant vision loss or limited physical mobility, such as if you've had a stroke or been in an accident. Finally, VRI should not be used if either the equipment is inadequate or the internet connection is not stable. On the other hand, VRI is an excellent option if you prefer not to use a local interpreter for privacy or personal reasons. In this video, Hunter shares how using VRI helped him tackle a sensitive, personal situation. Privacy matters.
Hi, I'm Hunter. My daughter Nikki was having a rough time in middle school. I knew something was going on, but I couldn't get her to open up. She finally agreed to see the therapist, and things are going a little better. Nikki is hearing and tells me what she talks about with the therapist, but I feel like I'm getting the edited version. I wanted to have a family session so we're all on the same page. Nikki finally agreed and offered to interpret for me. Oh no, not an option. But I didn't want to use a local interpreter. This is very personal, and I want to keep it private. There are only 2 within 50 miles, and I know both of them socially. I had used VRI a few times for work, so I thought it might work for this. I sent the therapist an email suggesting VRI. She didn't know that you could do remote interpreting. She'd never worked with the deaf person before and thought you always had to have an on-site interpreter. She was willing to give it a try and connected with the referral agency I recommended. They answered her questions, verified that she had the right technology, and scheduled VRI for Nikki's next appointment. I really appreciated the extra effort the provider put into making sure our therapist was comfortable with the process, especially my privacy concerns. The interpreter, Manuel, did a great job. He connected with the therapist a few minutes before our appointment to make sure the technology was working and confirmed that the camera was positioned so that he had a good view of all 3 of us. It worked perfectly. I'm better prepared to help Nikki. VRI was so successful. In fact, the therapist suggested we have a family session every 2 months. I feel like Dad of the Year.
Here are things you can do to make the most of your VRI experience. First, consider the setting. If you have a choice, find a quiet, private setting. This minimizes background noise, which will allow the interpreter to translate more effectively. Lighting is also important. A well-lit environment makes it easier for the interpreter to communicate with you and for you to follow the interpreter. Good technology makes a big difference. Most newer laptops and mobile devices have high-resolution screens and adequate cameras. If you're using older technology, upgrading to a separate digital video camera is a relatively inexpensive investment that can have a significant impact. When you schedule the session, be sure to build in time to connect with the remote interpreter a few minutes before the meeting to troubleshoot possible connection issues, talk through the agenda, and prepare the interpreter. Before the VRI session, send the referral service an explanation of the meeting's purpose, supporting documents, and other information so the interpreter is able to prepare. You can also send it to the interpreter at the same time. That will make the session more efficient, and it's a good strategy whenever you work with an on-site interpreter. The day of the session, make sure your device is fully charged or plugged in and the camera is working. Confirm your internet connection is strong at speedtest.net. Connect with the interpreter before the meeting begins to check sight lines and lighting, and then make any adjustments as needed. During the session, make sure you're comfortable with the interpreter and you're getting the information you need. If you're not, you may need to end the connection and alert the person who scheduled the interpreter that there's an issue. You can also ask the interpreter if there's someone else on the referral agency team that could take over. This is okay as long as your request is based on access to effective communication. Don't worry about offending the interpreter. Their goal is the same as yours, to make sure that you communicate as effectively as possible with the hearing person. As you build a relationship with a referral service, they can develop a list of interpreters you prefer, as well as those that do not work well for your access. In this next video, Mai, like many deaf people, has to think about communication access before attending the community event. When a qualified interpreter was unavailable, VRI allowed her to voice her concerns. My opinions count.
Hi, I'm Mai. I'm pretty passionate about affordable housing, so I signed up to attend a public hearing on a proposed multifamily development in my neighborhood. I wanted to be sure that the developer planned to include key safety measures, like visual alerts in all apartments and a security system. I sent the city coordinator an email telling her I was planning to attend and that I was deaf and would need an interpreter. A couple of days before the hearing, I was notified that an interpreter wasn't available that day, but if I submitted my questions by mail, she'd make sure the developer answered them. I know that interpreters are scarce in my area, but I have a right to be part of the discussion. I wanted to ask my own questions. I sent the coordinator an email suggesting VRI and recommended an agency I've used in the past. The coordinator agreed to look into it and notified me the next day that she had arranged VRI for the hearing. The city provided a dedicated tablet and a stand, and the interpreter was on the monitor part of the live stream. It worked great. The next day, the coordinator sent me an email thanking me for introducing her to VRI. I hope this makes it easier for other deaf citizens to become more active in their communities.
Like Mai, you have the right to effective communications access. VRI is an increasingly popular option because of its flexibility, availability, and access to qualified interpreters with specialized expertise. You can learn more about VRI and other communication solutions at the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division website at mn.gov/deaf-hard-of-hearing. You'll also find a list of qualified VRI service providers. Brought to you by the Minnesota Department of Human Services, Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services Division.